The room smelled like red wine, starch, and something colder hiding beneath both. Silver clinked. A violin on the overhead speakers trembled through its last note, and in the middle of that polished, expensive glow, a girl with shaking fingers wrote her own death sentence on a linen napkin. Elena Bellini was 22, a waitress in Manhattan, and she had never been the kind of woman men noticed twice. She came to work with a simple plan: survive the dinner rush, smile for the cruel customers, go home with enough cash to cover her father's medication. Until Dante Salvatore looked up from table 9. Who was he, really, that the whole room seemed to breathe around him? Why did one glance from him feel more dangerous than the waiter returning with murder in his cuff and blood under his nails? For the first time in her life, Elena handed her fear to a stranger, and he picked it up like it belonged to him. By the time Dante Salvatore walked in, the dining room had already turned into the kind of place where people lied with perfect posture. I knew that because I had spent 9 months carrying plates to Santoros and learning how to tell the difference between rich men and dangerous ones. Rich men looked around. Dangerous men made the room look around for them. He came in, wearing black, no tie, his coat still holding a trace of night air. Not cologne first, cold first, then cedar and smoke, though I never saw a cigarette between his fingers. Just a silver lighter. He turned once in his palm before tucking it away. The maître straightened so fast I thought his spine might crack. 2 men followed Dante in, broad enough to block candlelight. Another one stayed at the door. No one announced him. No one needed to. Table 9 had been held empty all evening. Bellini, mister. Santoro snapped from behind the host's stand. Water. I took the bottle because my hands knew how to work even when the rest of me wanted to stand still. I was halfway across the room when I saw the waiter in the mirror behind the bar. At first, nothing about him registered except that I hadn't seen him before. White shirt, black vest, tray balanced wrong. Then the mirror caught his cuff. There was blood on it. A thin, dark line just above his wrist. He disappeared through the service door. Another man, dressed as a busboy, leaned close enough to murmur something. I couldn't hear it over cutlery and low piano, but I didn't need to. My father's stroke had stolen half his words 3 years earlier. Since then I had learned to read mouths because love makes you adapt or watch someone disappear in front of you. I looked at the busboy's reflection and read every shape. After table 9, take the girl. If she talks, kill her. The bottle almost slipped from my hand. I kept walking. I don't know what instinct made me do it. Maybe terror made me honest. Maybe the whole room bending around Dante Salvatore told me exactly what kind of man he was. Not safe. Not kind. But final. I stopped at his table. He didn't look at me at first. He was reading something on his phone while the man to his right murmured in Italian. I put down the water. My pulse was so loud I thought it might shake the glassware. There was a folded cocktail napkin beside his plate. My order pad was in my apron, but writing on that would have been too obvious, so I picked up the pencil from the wine list, bent as if noting a bottle recommendation, and scratched the words across linen under the cover of my forearm. They were going to kill me. The fibers dragged under the point. My first line shook. The second did not. That was the strangest part. Somewhere between there and kill, my hands steadied. I set the pencil down. Dante looked up. His eyes were dark enough to look black in the low light, but they were not empty. That would have been easier. They were attentive, measured, the eyes of a man who missed nothing because missing things got people buried. He glanced at my face, then at the napkin, then back to my face. I thought I might cry. I didn't. His gaze sharpened by a fraction. That was all. No widened eyes, no sudden movement, no pity. He placed 2 fingers over the napkin, drew it toward himself as if considering dessert, and read the words without lowering his head. Then he reached into his pocket, took out a silver lighter, and set it on top of my message. Click. Just a soft metallic sound, dry, precise. It was the loudest thing I had ever heard. Still or sparkling? He asked. My mouth worked once before. Sound came. Still. He held my eyes another second too long. You saw who said it? I nodded once. The service door opened behind me. The fake waiter was back. Dante smiled at me then, and if I hadn't already been terrified, that smile would have done it. It was beautiful in the way knives were beautiful. All clean line, no mercy. "Thank you," he said, loud enough for the room to hear. "Little witness." The name landed cold. My stomach dropped. He leaned back in his chair as the waiter approached with a tray holding a bottle of Barolo he had not ordered. "Sir," the man said. Dante never looked at the wine. Instead, he asked, in easy Italian, "How long have you worked for Santoro?" The waiter froze, not because of the question, because he answered in the wrong dialect. One of Dante's men stood so quickly his chair scraped marble. Everything after that happened in pieces, my body stored separately. The bottle shattered. Someone screamed. Dante caught my wrist and pulled me down beside his chair just as a gun coughed under the tablecloth. Not a movie sound. Smaller. Meaner. His other hand moved once. I didn't see the knife, only the result. The waiter made a wet noise and folded. People dropped under tables. Glass broke. One of Dante's men shot the busboy at the service door before he made it 2 steps. The room filled with the terrible silence that came after sudden violence, when everyone was still alive enough to understand what they had almost become. Dante was already on his feet, still holding my wrist. "Look at me," he said. I did. There was blood on his cuff now. Not his. "Did they touch you?" "No." "Did anyone else hear them?" "I don't know." That almost seemed to matter more. He studied my face with a concentration that felt invasive and careful at once. Then his thumb shifted once against the inside of my wrist, measuring my pulse. Not tender. Assessing. Too gentle for assessment. Too impersonal for comfort. Mr. Personal for comfort. Santoro crawled out from behind the host stand, shaking. "Dante closed the restaurant," Dante said without looking at him. "Police will arrive after my people are done." His voice was quiet. Everyone obeyed it anyway. I found mine somewhere under the taste of metal in my throat. "I need to go home." "No," he said. "Just that." No explanation. No room. I tried to pull my hand free. His grip tightened. Not enough to hurt. Enough to remind. "My father, if they knew to threaten you here," he said. "Home is the first place they'll watch." I stared at him. He bent, picked up the napkin with my words on it, folded it once, and slipped it into his inner pocket like evidence or promise. Then he clicked the lighter shut in his fist and steered me toward the private exit behind table 9. I looked back once at the overturned glasses, the white tablecloth turning red, the door to the service hall hanging open. One shift earlier, I had still been a waitress. Then Dante Salvatore saw my napkin. And I never went home again. The house was not what I expected. I didn't know what I expected from a mafia boss's home exactly. Gold everywhere, maybe. Velvet. Women with blank faces and expensive dresses drifting through halls like smoke. Instead, Dante's estate looked almost severe. Old stone on the outside, dark wood inside, tall windows reflecting back only night. The luxury was there but quiet. Money so settled it didn't need to raise its voice. I stood in the front hall with dried restaurant blood on my sleeve and tried not to sway. A woman in navy scrubs and pearl earrings came down the staircase with a medical bag in one hand and authority in the other. "This her?" she asked. Dante had let go of me at the door, which somehow made me more aware of him. "Yes." The woman took my chin between cool fingers and turned my face toward the light. "Any injuries?" "No. Shot counts. I'm fine." "That," she said, "is how people usually introduce a collapse." One of the men behind Dante laughed under his breath. The woman looked at me again, softer now. "Lucia Ferraro, sit down before I become rude." I sat because the room had started tilting. A second man appeared from the hallway carrying 2 duffel bags and a protein shake the color of wet cement. He was handsome in an overworked way, with sharp brows and the expression of someone perpetually offended by life. He saw me, saw the blood, and sighed to the ceiling. "Madonna, I leave for 40 minutes, and the boss brings home a homicide." This is why no one likes you, Nino, Lucia said. That is false, he said. Women adore me, men fear me, children wave. No one waves at you. They do from a respectful distance. Dante walked past both of them. Nino straightened. Yes, boss. Guest wing. 2 men outside her door. No phones, no windows unlatched. I pushed myself up so quickly the armchair legs scraped. No. 4 heads turned. My face burned, but I kept going because fear had already taken enough for me tonight. You do not get to put me in a room and assign guards like I'm alive, Nino offered. Lucia shut her eyes briefly. Please don't help. Dante looked at me in a way that made the rest of the hall recede. You were marked in a public restaurant where my reservation was known to 6 people. That means whoever sent those men had access, planning, and patience. He took 1 step closer. You are not leaving tonight. Because you say so. Yes. I hated how simple that answer was. Hated more that part of me felt steadier for hearing it. Lucia touched my elbow. Come on, Elena. I blinked. How do you know my name? Because, unlike these men, I ask questions before blood dries. Nino handed her the duffel bags. I put clothes in there. I looked at him. He lifted 1 shoulder. You're shorter than Lucia, so if the pants drag, consider it character building. I should not have almost smiled. I definitely should not have smiled at a man wearing a shoulder holster and carrying vanilla sludge. He caught it and pointed accusingly at Lucia. See? I am warmth in human form. You're a tax penalty in human form, Lucia said. She led me upstairs through a corridor that smelled faintly of lemon oil and gunmetal. The house made different sounds than ordinary houses. Not pipes settling or televisions murmuring. Footsteps pausing outside doors. Distant Italian spoken low enough to hide its edges. The particular hush of armed men pretending to be furniture. My room was larger than my whole apartment. Lucia set the bags down on a bench at the foot of the bed. Bathroom there. Lock works from the inside. That one matters. Something in her tone made me look up. She studied me for a second, then reached into her pocket and handed me a burner phone. 1 call. Speaker on. You say you're staying with a friend because the subway shut down. Nothing about tonight. My throat tightened so fast it hurt. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I'm still deciding if you're about to ruin my week. After she left, I called my father. He answered on the 3rd ring with a rough inhale. Lena? The nickname from home almost broke me. I'm okay, I said too quickly. I'm staying at Gia's, late shift. A long pause. My father's stroke had turned silence into its own language. I pictured him at our kitchen table, 1 hand around his mug, trying to arrange words that wouldn't betray how hard they were now. Home? He managed. Tomorrow. It was a lie. I knew it as I said it. His breathing changed. He knew it too. I'm okay, I repeated. When I hung up, I stared at my reflection in the black window glass and barely recognized the girl in it. I showered until the water ran cold. Nino's bag contained soft black leggings, a t-shirt, socks, and God help me a toothbrush still in pharmacy plastic. The other bag held food. Lucia had added toast. Nino had apparently added a protein bar and a handwritten note, do not let Lucia bully you into eating jam. Sugar is a cartel. I laughed once helplessly, then clapped a hand over my mouth. Someone knocked on the door. I opened it a few inches. Dante stood on the other side. No jacket now. Dark shirt with the sleeves rolled once. He looked less like a public figure of controlled power and more like the private mechanism underneath it. Worse somehow. I should have stepped back. I didn't. His eyes flicked over my face, probably cataloging exhaustion, fear, the fact I had washed the blood off, but not the memory. I'm told you called your father, he said. Yes. Good. I waited. He held out a plain envelope. Inside was a key card and a folded sheet of paper. House rules, he said. I stared at him. House rules. You can read. There was no mockery in it, which irritated me more. I unfolded the page. Don't leave the East Wing alone. Don't use the main stairs after midnight. If I say, get down, you get down. If I say run, you don't ask where. If Nino tells you something is healthy, assume it tastes like regret. I looked up despite myself. Dante's mouth had almost changed, not quite a smile. The memory of one. Is that last one official Mafia policy? I asked. It should be. For one strange second, the night loosened around its edges. Then I remembered the waiter's bloody cuff. I tightened again. How long am I staying here? He answered without hesitation. Until I know who wanted you dead. And if I don't agree? His gaze settled fully on me. Little witness, agreement would have been a luxury before the first shot. I wanted to tell him not to call me that. I wanted to ask why it sounded less cold now than it had in the restaurant. I wanted too many things at once and understood none of them. He stepped back from the doorway. Sleep, he said. Tomorrow I start asking you what you saw. He turned and walked away. I stood there, with the rules in my hand, 2 guards at the end of the hall, and the full weight of a life I had not chosen settling around me like a lock. By morning, his rules had learned my name. The next morning, the house woke before the sun. I knew because I did. At 5:30, I gave up on sleep, padded across cold hardwood in borrowed socks, and opened the curtains just enough to see dawn cut through the trees beyond the east lawn. The grounds looked less like a home and more like a border someone rich enough had turned into architecture. Stone wall, iron gate, men moving in pairs along the perimeter with the deliberate boredom of professionals. There was paper on the desk by the window. Heavy cream stock. Graphite pencils sharpened to points. I stared at them too long. No one had said they were for me, but they felt placed. Not accidentally. Not kindly. Exactly. Observed. I sat. Drawing had begun as a way to survive my father's silence. After the stroke, words exhausted him. Faces didn't. I started sketching everything he forgot how to say, the butcher on our corner. The neighbor's stupid dog. The exact angle of the coffee mug he always reached for first. Then I started sketching what I couldn't explain to anyone else. Fear. Rent notices. The tilt of men who were about to ask for too much. Now I closed my eyes and rebuilt the waiter from memory. The line of his jaw. Deep-set eyes, a nick across the left eyebrow. His ear folded slightly at the top. Old injury. Roman nose. A serpent tattoo coiling above the shirt cuff where blood had marked the fabric. By the time Lucia knocked and brought coffee, he was staring back at me from the page like he had never died. She stopped in the doorway. Oh, she said. I looked up. What? Nothing. Only that men with guns become very emotional when art saves them paperwork. She set the tray down and came closer. Her hand hovered over the sketch but didn't touch. Respect. I noticed that. You drew this from last night? Yes. After one look? A few looks. Lucia's brows lifted. Well, that's inconveniently useful. By 9, I was sitting in a room lined with books while Dante, Marco DeSantis, and a silent lawyer type I later learned was Matteo Greco looked over my shoulder. Marco was built like an old church bell, solid, weathered, impossible to ignore. He wore his suit like he expected to need both fists by noon. He also looked at me as if I were a live wire placed too close to gasoline. Matteo was the opposite. Impeccable gray suit. Cufflinks. Soft voice. Eyes that never seemed to blink at the same speed as the rest of him. Dante stood behind me. That was the problem. If he had sat across the table, maybe I could have thought, but he stood at my shoulder, one hand on the back of my chair, saying nothing, while his presence rearranged the air. Marco took the page. This is Santino Corda. You know him? I asked. I know who he worked for, Dante said. His voice came from close enough that I felt it in the back of my neck. I turned a little in the chair. Who? Not yet. I hated him for that. I hated that my body had already learned the difference between his quiet and everyone else's. Matteo set a photograph on the table. Did either of the men from last night wear this ring? It was a signet, black stone, silver setting. Yes, I said immediately. The busboy, right hand. Matteo and Marco exchanged a look too quick for most people to catch. Not for me. Dante did not miss it either. Say it. Marco exhaled through his nose. Viscari men wear black on private jobs. I frowned. Viscari? Adriano Viscari, Matteo said smoothly. Our underboss handles ports, distributions, and external disputes. The word lodged. Dante finally moved, coming around the chair to lean against the edge of the desk. Adriano also knew where I was dining. Cold spread under my ribs. You think this came from inside your own family? I don't think, he said. I count. Marco took my sketch and headed for the door. I'll run facial recognition to private channels. Do that, Dante said. And double the east lawn. After Marco left, Matteo offered me a sympathetic smile polished enough to slide off. You've been very brave, Miss Bellini. I almost corrected him. I was not brave. I was trapped and functioning. Different thing. He left too. That should have improved the room. It did not. Dante picked up a second sheet from the desk. Blank. Held it out to me. Draw the busboy. I took it because refusing him exhausted me. You issue orders to everyone like this? Only the useful ones. That's not nicer. I wasn't trying for nice. The answer should have annoyed me. It did. It also made something under my skin go taut and bright. I looked down and started sketching. Halfway through, his hand came down beside mine to steady the page against the desk. My pencil paused. He didn't touch me? Not quite, but his knuckles brushed the side of my wrist when he moved, and the contact was so brief, I could have pretended it didn't happen if my pulse hadn't given me up immediately. Sorry, he said. He did not sound sorry. I finished the jawline badly and erased it. Again, he said. You were very bossy for someone whose men almost got him killed. His silence landed. I realized 1 beat late that I had said that out loud. Slowly he looked at me. I swallowed. Then, unexpectedly, one corner of his mouth shifted. There she is. Who? The girl who writes death warnings on napkins and still finds time to be rude. Heat climbed my throat. You keep calling me little witness like it's charming. It isn't meant to be. That should have helped. It didn't. A phone vibrated in his pocket. He checked it once, expression flattening into something unreadable. What? I asked. 3 Viscari warehouses emptied overnight. He slipped the phone away. Someone's already moving. Lucia appeared in the doorway with lunch and took one look at Dante's face. Bad? Yes. Should I move her downstairs? No, he said. I put the pencil down. Move me? Dante's gaze returned to mine. If this breach is internal, East Wing is no longer far enough. The room went colder. He held my sketch between 2 fingers. Finish this, then you move closer to my floor. I stared at him. Absolutely not. He did not raise his voice. Absolutely yes. It was not the command that unsettled me. It was the reason. He no longer trusted the walls between us. Dante. He had known the second her hand steadied on the word kill that she would be a problem. Not because she was fragile. Because she wasn't. Julia had looked at him that same way once in a back room off Mulberry Street, silent, pale, not begging, as if fear was a private thing and she would die before letting men own it. He had failed his sister. When Elena Bellini put graphite to paper, he understood something worse than desire. He trusted her eyes. Across the lawn, Adriano's car rolled through the front gate, and Dante knew the war had already entered his house. Moving closer to Dante's floor felt like being translated into a harsher language. The room itself was beautiful, smaller than the guest suite. Warmer, one wall of books and another of tall windows facing the east gardens. But it sat at the end of a corridor that never truly emptied. Men passed in silence. Doors opened and closed on murmur-soft hinges. Once, standing by my doorway at dusk, I heard Italian spoken low behind the study door, and then the sound of a fist hitting wood exactly once. Not rage. Decision. Lucia found me there later with a tray of soup and bread. You keep standing in halls like an abandoned ghost, she said. I'm trying to understand the floor plan. Wonderful. Next, learn how to eat while terrified. I took the tray. Do you always tell people what to do? Yes, it saves time. I smiled despite myself. That evening, the storm came in hard enough to shake the leaded windows. Rain lashed the glass. Power flickered once, recovered, then went out for 3 long breaths before the generator kicked in with a low mechanical groan. I was crossing the back corridor when darkness swallowed the house. I stopped dead. The emergency lights took too long. In those few seconds, I heard shoes striking marble from the opposite end of the hall, and my body made the decision before my mind did. I turned, hit the half-lit chapel door, and stumbled down the narrow stone steps inside. The second step was wet from someone's boots. My foot went out. I did not scream. The sound snagged in my throat. Then a hand caught my forearm so hard it almost bruised, and another arm came around my waist before my back hit stone. When the lights thinned back in, I found myself against Dante's chest on the chapel stairs, his breath rougher than I had ever heard it. For a second, neither of us moved. The house generator hummed awake. Rain battered stained glass. Somewhere above us, men shouted for status checks. His hand remained locked around my forearm. Mine was fisted in his shirt. I became aware of everything at once. The heat of him, the cold edge of the stair pressing into my heel, the fact that if he moved his head an inch, his mouth would be at my temple. You run toward dark places often? He asked. His voice was low and strange. I thought someone was behind me. There was. I tipped my face up. You. His eyes met mine. This was one of those moments that did not become what it could have become only because something outside it interrupted first. The almost lived between us like weather. Thick, charged, impossible to hold for long. He released my forearm slowly, as if he did not entirely trust his own fingers. Then he saw the chapel. Not the room, the memorial shelf along the far wall. 5 candles, a brass cross. 1 small framed photograph, half hidden by shadow. He went still in a way I had started to understand meant danger, but not for me. Not this time. The photo was of a dark-haired girl about 17, laughing at something beyond the frame. I looked at him. Who is she? His jaw tightened. Dante, don't. Not sharp, worse, quiet enough to show effort. I should have let it go. Instead, I noticed the scar I had never seen before, pale against the inside of his left wrist where his cuff had ridden back in the fall. Thin, jagged, old, the kind of scar that came from broken glass or a rushed blade. His gaze followed mine. Something closed. Then footsteps thundered overhead, and the moment fractured. Nino burst into the chapel doorway carrying a flashlight, a pistol, and somehow a plastic container of almonds. There you are, dear Lord. He took in our position on the stairs and looked briefly heavenward. I disappear for 6 minutes to save my blood sugar, and romance tries to happen in a church. It was not romance, I said too fast. Of course, Nino said. Nothing says not romance like the boss holding a woman against his chest in front of the Virgin Mary. Lucia peered behind him, took the flashlight out of his hand, and smacked his shoulder with it. Move. He rubbed the spot. One day you'll strike me so hard I confess things. One day I'll care. Nino sighed with theatrical grief. This is why I fear love, also bread. Despite everything, a laugh escaped me. Dante looked down at the sound. Something in his expression changed. Not softened. Not exactly. But the blade edge of him shifted a fraction lower. He stood first, then offered me his hand. I hesitated a moment too long. He waited. I put my hand in his. His grip closed, careful now, and he drew me up the remaining steps. My damn shoe slipped once. His hand tightened instantly at my waist. A second almost. Smaller. Hotter. By the time we reached the corridor, Marco was already there with 2 men and murder in his eyes. Perimeter tricked on the north wall, he said. No breach. Test run. Whose? Dante asked. We found a coin wedged in the sensor casing. Marco opened his palm. Black stone set in silver. Viscari. Dante's expression did not change. That frightened me more than if it had. We resolved the restaurant piece, Marco added, glancing at me. Santino Corda killed the real waiter in the pantry before service. He was contracted through one of Viscari's offshore crews. So yes, they meant to silence the witness and hit you in the same room. Fast answer. Fresh dread. Any word from Adriano? Dante asked. Matteo's voice came from the hall behind us. He sends outrage, which from him is practically affection. Everyone turned. He held a folder under one arm, hair damp from rain, tie perfect. His gaze landed on me only briefly. Also, he said, he wants a meeting tomorrow. Claims he wishes to personally apologize for the insult done under our roof. Our. Again that word, Marco muttered. I'd rather eat glass. Nino lifted his almond container. Can I be excused? My doctor says stress preserves fat. Lucia said, No doctor has ever said that. Dante took the ring from Marco and closed his fist over it. The dry metallic click sounded, then his lighter in his other hand, opening and shutting once without flame. A tell, maybe, or restraint. He looked at me. Not the men. Stay away from exterior doors, he said. No chapel steps in the dark. Something about the specificity made heat rise unexpectedly behind my ribs. I wasn't planning to fall again. No, he said. You're planning to pretend you don't scare easily. I opened my mouth. He cut me off with a look that knew too much. Then he turned to the others, and the room turned with him. The storm kept striking the windows while he began preparing for war. And I could not stop thinking about the way he had caught me before the stone did. 3 things happened the next day, and none of them cared what order I was ready for them in. First, I met Adriano Viscari. Second, my father's secret arrived at Dante's house in a butchered envelope. Third, I made a mistake that cost all of us. Adriano came just after noon. I watched from the library doorway while Dante received him in the study with Marco at one side and Matteo at the other. Nino hovered farther back, pretending to care deeply about his electrolyte water. Adriano was beautiful in a way that made my skin want to step backward. Same general world as Dante, dark suit, controlled shoulders, that old country severity refined by money, but where Dante's stillness felt deliberate. Adriano's felt empty, like there was no one living behind it unless violence called him forward. He saw me almost immediately. Of course he did. Is this the artist? He asked. The words should not have sounded insulting. It did. I stiffened. Dante did not look at me, but I felt the shift in the room anyway. She has a name, he said. Adriano smiled. Then I'm sure she can keep it. Nino choked on his drink so dramatically Lucia, who had entered with coffee, slapped his back with entirely too much satisfaction. The meeting lasted 20 minutes. Too polite. Too smooth. Men like that were never more dangerous than when they were using full sentences. I only learned the important part afterward, when Marco came to find Dante and held up a manila envelope sealed with brown tape. It was pushed through the service gate, he said. No camera catch. Dante opened it on the desk. Inside was one of my father's sketch folders. My knees nearly gave out. I crossed the room before anyone told me to stop. Where did you get that? Marco answered. I just said. I snatched the folder open. Most of the pages were mine. Street studies, practice hands. The butcher on Essex, a woman on the train asleep against a violin case. Then, between 2 charcoal portraits, I found what did not belong. Thin vellum sheets covered in lines and numbers I recognized only after my pulse settled enough to let memory work. My father's handwriting. Before the stroke, he had done books for half the neighborhood. Dry cleaners, cafes. Once, years ago, a construction office that never actually built anything. He had always said numbers were safer than people because they told the truth, if you wind them up correctly. I looked closer. These are account transfers. Matteo stepped beside me. You can tell that from a glance? My father color-coded debits in groups of 3 when he was nervous. Why would he be nervous? Dante asked. I swallowed. There it was, the part I had never volunteered, because some of those books weren't for legal businesses. Silence. Not surprise. Worse. Confirmation of every fear I had about what they would hear in that. My father stopped years ago, I said quickly. After his stroke, he never hurt anyone. Dante's gaze moved over the pages. Did you know he kept this? No. That part was true enough to hurt. I spread the vellum on the desk. Numbers floated over one another in layers that made no sense until I shifted the pages. Then the account trails aligned into shapes. Warehouse addresses, port codes, 3 shell companies feeding the same central ledger. Adriano's side businesses. Marco swore softly. Lucia crossed her arms. Well, the Bellinis continue to be inconveniently useful. My face burned. I'm sorry. Dante looked up sharply. For what? For bringing this here? For not knowing? For being someone's daughter? I stopped. The room changed around the edges. He spoke more quietly. Your father hid leverage, that is not your crime. No one had said anything kind enough to feel dangerous in a long time. I didn't know where to put it. I busied my hands with the pages. He hid it inside my drawings because no one checks boring things carefully. Nino peered over Marco's shoulder. This is why I never trusted office supplies. Lucia said, you distrust lettuce. Correct. It has no nutritional loyalty. The laugh that escaped me was thin but real. Later, after plans started moving around me too quickly to understand, I asked for my phone. No, Dante said. I need to call my father. He is already being relocated. My heart jammed hard against my ribs. By who? By Marco. To a safer apartment. I should have let that be enough. Instead, I waited until evening, until the study emptied and the hall outside my room went quiet. And I used the old number I still remembered for Mrs. Carlucci downstairs from our apartment. She adored my father. She also owned exactly the kind of unsecured landline Dante would have hated. I only meant to check if the move had happened. She answered on the second ring. Elena, thank God. Ice went through me. Why? Men were there this afternoon asking after your father. Nice coats. Dead eyes. My grip tightened around the receiver. Did they say who sent them? No, sweetheart, but one asked about your sketchbook. I closed my eyes. At the exact same moment, I heard a floorboard creak outside my door. Too late, I turned. Dante stood there, not angry. Not yet. Worse. Still. He had heard enough. I lowered the phone slowly. I needed to know if he was safe, I said, and now they know you'll still break procedure for him. The words were flat, not cruel. That made them land harder. I'm sorry. This time he didn't stop me. He came fully into the room, took the phone from my hand, and disconnected it with a clean press of his thumb. The silver lighter appeared in his other hand and clicked once, the sound dry in the silence. Marco, he said into the hall. Marco was there instantly. Of course he was. Trace exposure, Dante said. Carlucci building, Bellini network, all known contacts. Move Paolo again. The guilt hit so hard my vision thinned. Marco's eyes cut to me, then away. On it. When he left, Dante remained. He looked at me for a long time. Your fear is understandable, he said. Your mistake is not small. I nodded because anything else would have been dishonest. His jaw shifted once. And I cannot protect you from what I don't know you'll do. That hurt because it sounded less like anger than disappointment. He turned for the door. Dante, he stopped. I hated how much it cost to say the next part. I didn't call because I don't trust you. I called because if something happened to my father while I was here, my voice failed. He did not come closer, did not touch me. Somehow that was the kindest thing he could have done. When this is over, he said without turning around, you can decide whether trusting me was your mistake. Then he left me alone with my father's hidden numbers, and the first crack I had put between us myself. War arrived in daylight. That was the first insult. The second was that it came dressed as medicine. Lucia and I were in the downstairs clinic room the next morning sorting my father's transfer papers when the first man through the service entrance wore paramedic blue. Even before Marco shouted, I knew something was wrong. The badge on the man's chest had the wrong county seal. The gurney wheels made almost no sound on stone because they weren't carrying enough weight. Then all at once the house split open. A shot cracked from the corridor. Lucia slammed me behind the steel supply cabinet and pulled a pistol from beneath a stack of folded towels with the bored competence of a woman who had stopped being surprising years ago. Stay down, she said. Nino dove through the doorway an instant later carrying 2 rifles and swearing in creative regional Italian. They're in the South Hall, he barked. Also, I would like it noted this is exactly why I said fake ambulances are tacky. Lucia took one of the rifles without comment. I stared. You shoot? She gave me a look. I've delivered twins during a blackout and stitched gunmen in a pantry. Lower your standards. The gunfire moved closer. Someone screamed upstairs. I should have stayed behind the cabinet. I know that. But the side corridor beyond the clinic had windows facing the drive, and beyond them, the drive curled toward the east gate where black SUVs were fishtailing over rain-slick gravel. If those were Marco's men coming back with my father, I needed to know. I crawled low to the window line and lifted myself enough to see. A hand closed around the back of my shirt and yanked me down just as glass exploded over us. I hit the floor hard, half on top of Dante. He had come in so fast I had never heard him. His body covered mine before the second shot punched through the window frame. Not clumsy, not frantic. Total. The kind of protection that didn't ask whether I deserved it first. Stay under me, he said. There was blood on his collar. My breath tore. You're hurt. Not mine. The words were almost gentle. The gun in his hand was not. He rose just enough to fire twice through the broken glass. One man dropped beside the rosemary hedge outside. Another stumbled behind the stone fountain. Dante moved like something built for narrow seconds efficient enough to feel inhuman, terrifying because it wasn't loud. No wasted motion. No sound from him except breath. Lucia was already on her feet, rifle braced against a cabinet. Nino slid across the tile to reload for her and muttered, If I die during a carb deficit, tell my mother I wanted tiramisu. Shoot first, Lucia said. More dessert later. A third attacker came through the clinic doorway. I saw the knife before anyone else did because his wrist turned the same way Santino Cortez had in the restaurant. Same inward hitch. Same habit of hiding the weapon inside the line of the forearm. My hand shot out without thinking and caught Dante's sleeve. Left, I gasped. Dante pivoted. The man never reached us. When it ended all at once. The kind of silence that follows gunfire is never clean. It buzzes. It carries hot metal and plaster dust and the awful awareness that someone might still stand up. Dante turned back to me and dropped to one knee. My hands were shaking so hard I tucked them under my arms. He saw anyway. Look at me, Elena. I did. His thumb touched my cheek once, brushing away a fleck of glass. The contact stunned me more than the bullets had. Too careful. Too intimate for the middle of blood and broken tiles. You listened, he said. I almost laughed because I hadn't. I had gone to the window like an idiot and nearly gotten us both killed. He knew that too. His gaze shifted to my mouth for one dangerous second, then away. The almost stretched between us again. Another inch and the whole world might have tilted. He stood before it could. Marco came in, swearing into his radio, one sleeve soaped red. Rear team neutralized. We lost the south camera grid. And your guest called out the knife man before I even saw him. Dante looked at me as if hearing something confirm itself. Lucia started stitching a graze along Nino's upper arm while he narrated his own suffering with priestly dignity. I want everyone to remember I was brave with very low blood sugar. You are screaming about almonds, Lucia said. They are a complete protein. They are not a last rite. Nino looked at me, pale but alive. Elena, if I die, do not let them put me in a slim-fit suit. I refuse to be humiliated in death. The laugh broke out of me before I could stop it, and in the same second Dante's face changed, not softened. Opened. Only a fraction, only long enough for me to see the man beneath the title and the violence and the house full of armed stillness. A man who had been waiting, against reason, to hear me laugh after gunfire. Then Marco laid two things on the cabinet: a black signet ring and a folded church bulletin stained with rain. I frowned. What is that? Found in the pocket of the man at the hedge, Marco said. Dante picked it up first. The chapel bulletin was from the memorial downstairs. The date on the back was 19 years old. My stomach turned. That means something to you. He didn't answer, but when he opened his silver lighter with that dry metallic click, I saw his hand tighten just enough to whiten the knuckles. Julia. The girl in the photograph. The wound had a name now, even if he had not given it to me. Marco's phone buzzed. He checked the screen and went grim. We intercepted a call before the attack. Matteo signed off on the South Gate route. The room went still. Not because we understood it. Because we almost did. Matteo, the polished lawyer. Matteo with the patient eyes. Matteo who asked about rings and said our as if he had earned it. Dante said nothing for a long second. Then, very quietly, get him found. Marco left at once. Dante looked back at me. She wrote across linen and didn't beg. The thought moved through him again, not in words this time, but in the shape of an admission he had been resisting since the restaurant. Elena Bellini frightened him because she saw the blade, named it, and still chose precision over panic. No one in his world had ever handed him fear that way. Clean, silent, trusting him to decide what came next. Little witness, he thought, and this time the name hurt. War had arrived, and now it knew her face. By evening, the house smelled like bleach, espresso, and the kind of exhaustion no one admitted out loud. Marco's men had scrubbed the clinic clean. Fresh glass sat in the window frames. Rugs were changed. The dead had been removed from the ground so efficiently it made my skin crawl. Mafia violence did not just destroy, it restored the surface afterward, as if that were the more terrible part. It knew how to continue. I sat in the kitchen with Lucia while she rewrapped Nino's bandage and insulted his pain tolerance. I could have been a concert pianist, he said solemnly. You can't play piano. That's what makes the loss theoretical and devastating. Lucia tied the gauze tighter. He hissed. I almost smiled, then remembered the blood on the clinic floor and stopped. She noticed. Of course she did. Eat anyway, she said, sliding me a bowl of broth. I stared at the steam. Does it ever become normal? Nino answered before she could. No, you just learn which part of it belongs to you. That landed differently coming from him. Less like wisdom, more like a confession he hadn't meant to make. Before I could ask, Marco appeared in the kitchen doorway with my father. For one suspended second, I forgot how to breathe. He looked smaller than he had in the apartment. Same dark cardigan, same careful hands. But he was alive, whole. His eyes found mine and filled with such helpless relief that I crossed the room before thought caught up. Papa. He touched my face with his good hand, thumb dragging once under my eye as if checking whether I was real. His speech came hard. You, safe? Yes? He looked past me then to the house itself, to the guards, to the expensive quiet. He understood enough. I took him to the library because it was the only room that felt less watched than the others. Rain tapped at the windows. Fire shifted low in the grate. My father sat heavily in the armchair and looked at the sketch folder on the table between us. The hidden vellum sheets were gone. Only my drawings remained. You knew, I said. He closed his eyes. That was answer enough. When? My voice shook. When did you start keeping records? Years. Why? His jaw worked. He hated how language failed him. Hated needing time from other people. Insurance? He finally managed. Bad men needed door. A door. Something to hold against men who made walls of everything. Did you know it was Dante Salvatore? His gaze lifted to mine. Another pause, then quietly, no. Not him. Adriano. Cold settled deeper, My father had done books for Adriano Viscari years ago. Not out of greed, out of rent and bad timing and the kind of compromises ordinary people made when they thought they were still near the edge of legality instead of over it. When he realized what Adriano really moved through those shell companies' girls, guns, port routes, started copying transfers in code and hiding them. Then the stroke took half his speech before he could use any of it. I sat back, sick. "Because of me," he said. "You here." "No." I grabbed his hand. "Because of him." But it wasn't clean enough for either of us to believe. Dante came to the doorway before we heard him. He stood there in a black shirt with no jacket, the silver lighter balanced once across his knuckles before disappearing into his palm. My father went tense. Not afraid, exactly. Human. He knew what kind of man filled a doorway that way. "Mr. Bellini," Dante said. My father tried to rise. "Sit," Dante told him, not unkindly. "You're leaving in 10 minutes. I looked up. Leaving where? North. Safe property outside Albany. New papers, new medication line, private nurse. The room tilted again. "You're sending him away. I'm keeping him alive." My father looked between us and understood more than I wanted him to. Dante set an envelope on the table. Inside were train tickets, identification documents, and enough cash to make my hands go numb. "One ticket has your name," he said. I stared at him. "You leave with him tonight," Dante went on. "By the time Adriano realizes Matteo is missing, this house will stop being a place you can survive by accident. A real exit." So sudden it felt like a trick, which was how I knew it wasn't one. If he'd wanted to keep me, he knew how. He was offering a door anyway. My father squeezed my fingers. "Go." I looked at Dante. "And you?" He didn't answer the question I asked. "You have enough now to choose with open eyes." That hurt because it was respect. I packed in 15 minutes. Sketchbook, sweater, burner phone, the train envelope. Nothing from my old apartment except the life already leaving it. At the station platform, Marco stood with us beneath sodium lights, while the tracks shone black with rain. My father sat on the bench, shoulders hunched inside a borrowed coat. The train's approach hummed somewhere far off, still invisible. "This is safer," Marco said. "I know. You sound like you hate me for it. I don't know you well enough." That almost made him smile. The train whistle sounded. Then I saw it. Matteo's cufflink on Marco's lapel. Not really his, of course. Same shape, same brushed silver edge, except the engraving on this one caught the light and brought back a memory from the study. Matteo standing over the vellum sheets, his sleeve dragging across the page. A faint smudge. Blue chalk. The same blue chalk line now marks the inside of the envelope Dante had given me. Blue dock chalk. Used for shipment lots. Not Albany. Pier 9. An ambush route. I went cold all over. Matteo hadn't just betrayed the South Gate. He had seen Dante's evacuation plan and altered the decoy packets. If I boarded this train, the men waiting at Pier 9 would assume Dante was on it. Marco would split the security detail. Dante would be exposed in the house with half protection. The train rolled in with the scream of brakes. "Get on," Marco said. My father reached for my hand. I looked at him. At the open train door. At the clean shape of escape. A future I had imagined my whole life. Work. Rent. Maybe art classes at night. A version of myself untouched by this. Then I saw Dante in my mind on the chapel stairs, in the clinic, at the library door. Choosing my safety over his want, again and again, even now. If I left, maybe I kept my old life. If I stayed, I lost it. I thought the choice would feel romantic. It didn't. It felt like grief, with good posture. I kissed my father's cheek, shoved the envelope into Marco's hand, and stepped back from the train. "Take him," I said. "Elena, take him now." Marco saw my face and understood enough not to argue. He got my father aboard as the doors chimed shut. My father pounded once on the glass, terrified and furious and loving me too much to forgive this quickly. I stood on the platform and watched the train carry my old life north without me. Then I turned and walked back toward Dante's war. I chose it myself. The car sent for me never reached the house. That was the first mistake. Mine, not theirs. I should have known Dante would never dispatch only one driver after a night like that. But grief had made my mind narrow and urgent, and when the black sedan pulled up by the side street outside the station with Salvatore plates and a driver who knew Marco's name, I got in. 10 minutes later, a cloth smelling of ether covered my mouth. I woke to rust, salt, and the groan of river chains. Warehouse. My wrists were tied in front of me with plastic cuffs. Better than behind, which meant whoever took me either underestimated me or wanted me able to do something later. The room was huge and mostly dark, cut by strips of harbor light through the upper windows. Crates. Hanging tarp. Old oil in the floorboards. Somewhere nearby, water-slapped pilings with patient violence. Matteo Greco stepped out from behind a stack of freight cases as if he were arriving late to dinner. "I was hoping for less chloroform," he said. "It's vulgar." I stared at him. "You should know." He gave me a sad little smile. That's fair. If he expected panic, disappointment, or tears, he was going to be disappointed himself. Fear was there. Of course it was. But I had spent too many hours now around men who wore danger like tailoring. Matteo was different only in that he had mistaken polish for disguise. "You altered the train packet," I said. "I did. Why?" "Because Dante is too good at being feared. It's a tedious obstacle. Adriano sent you." Matteo's mouth shifted. "Adriano and I share an opinion about Dante. He confuses loyalty with love. It makes him expensive." The line went through me sharper than a threat. Because somewhere under the cruelty was the shape of what Dante had cost himself to become. Matteo moved closer and crouched in front of me. "Did he tell you about Giulia?" My pulse stumbled. The photograph. The chapel bulletin. He saw the answer in my face and smiled without warmth. "No, of course not. Dante carries his dead like liturgy. Very private." "Shut up." "Ah." He leaned back on his heels. "So that matters." He stood and nodded to the far corner. Only then did I see Adriano. He had been there the whole time, half in shadow beside the river doors, hands in his coat pockets like patience itself. Something in me recoiled on sight. Not because he looked monstrous, because he didn't. He looked calm. Human. Like evil when it had slept well. "Elena Bellini," he said. "You should have taken the train. You should have stayed out of restaurants." That earned the smallest tilt of his head. Matteo laughed softly. "I told you, the mouth arrives after the fear." Adriano came closer. "Dante likes brave things. It's his worst habit." "What did you do to Giulia?" The question came out before I could stop it. For the first time, something real flickered under his face. Annoyance. Memory. "She was collateral on a deal he refused to honor," Adriano said. "I advised him to choose the ports. He chose his sister. Men died. The family weakened. She died anyway." He shrugged once. After that, he became useful. I tasted blood where I had bitten my cheek. "You let her die." "No," Adriano said. "I learned from it." There it was. The mirror. The line Dante had refused and Adriano had crossed so completely, it had vanished behind him. Matteo checked his watch. "We have 30 minutes before Dante decides the docks are the point instead of the bait." "Then perhaps we should prepare the witness," Adriano said. He left again into shadow. Matteo dragged a chair over and sat facing me. "Here is the part where lesser men hurt you, and imagine its strategy." I dislike theatrics, so I'll be plain. We need the location of Paolo Bellini's new property and any duplicate copies of the ledgers. "I don't know. I believe you. About the property, anyway." His gaze slid to my sketchbook, sitting on the crate beside him. "The rest may be inside there." My throat went dry. He opened it carefully, page by page. Train passengers. My father asleep in profile. Lucia's hands washing blood from a teacup, a study of Dante's lighter from memory, graphite burnished dark enough to shine. I had drawn it without meaning to on the drive from the station, the object that marked every moment around him. Click and decision. Click and restraint. Matteo stopped on the next page, the sketch I had made in the kitchen the night before, a chapel candle set behind cracked glass, its flame splitting into two uneven halves. He looked at it for a long time. Interesting, he murmured. You draw people correctly. You draw yourself honestly. I didn't answer. Do you know what Dante will become tonight if he thinks you're hurt? Yes. That should frighten you more than me. It did. That was the worst truth in the room. When he left to confer with Adriano near the loading doors, I lowered my eyes to the floor and breathed slowly until the panic stopped trying to climb my throat. Then I worked one wrist against the plastic cuff edge. Not to escape. To loosen circulation. Under the crate beside my chair, blue Doc chalk lay broken in half. My fingers found it by feel. While the two men argued in low voices, I bent my head and began sketching on the floor between my shoes. Quick lines, crate numbers, door positions, hook track overhead, fuel drum near east wall, river exit. If I survived even 10 more minutes, Dante would need the room faster than words could give it, and if I didn't survive, someone else might see the map. The warehouse doors banged open. Gunfire burst through the dark. Matteo smiled with miserable admiration. There he is. I did not wait to be rescued. That mattered to me. It still does. The first shot dropped one of Adriano's outer men beside the loading bay. The second shattered the overhead light above my chair. Darkness slammed down in strips and flashes. Men started shouting in Italian. Someone hit the alarm, a jagged mechanical scream that made the warehouse feel even more trapped. I rolled sideways with the chair before anyone could use me as leverage. The floor cracked against my shoulder. Pain shot white down my arm. I bit it back and kicked hard at the fuel drum I had marked in chalk. It rocked, tipped, and spilled across the concrete in a slick line that forced the nearest gunman to veer off his angle. Small victory. Mine. Then the silver lighter clicked in the dark. I heard it before I saw him. Dry metal. Close. Dante moved through the warehouse like a judgment no one could appeal. Not loud, not wild on the surface. The feral part was deeper than that, underneath every efficient decision. A man beyond speech now. Men fell where he looked longest. Marco came in through the side door with 2 shooters. Nino, astonishingly, was with them in a Kevlar vest, slightly too tight across his stomach and muttering, "If I get shot near fish, I'm haunting everybody." Matteo grabbed my arm before I could crawl farther and hold me upright by the cuffs. The muzzle at my ribs was cool enough to make me gasp. "There," he called into the dark. "Careful, Dante." Everything stopped. Not literally. The alarm still screamed. Water still screamed. Water still hit the pilings, but the emotional center of the room locked around that one line. Dante stepped into view 10 yards away. Blood on his cheek, coat gone. Gun low at his side. His eyes found the blue chalk map on the floor first. Then me. Something unreadable passed through his face. So fast I might have imagined it if I hadn't already begun learning his smallest fractures. Matteo pressed the barrel harder. "You came exactly as expected." Dante's voice was flat as the river. "And you overestimated how long you'd remain alive." Perhaps, but not by much. From the corner of my eye, I saw Adriano retreat farther back among the crates. Of course he would. Mirror men liked distance when other people bled first. "Give me one reason," Dante said to Matteo, "not to start with your hands." Matteo laughed once. "Because she is exactly the thing you failed to prevent the first time." I didn't understand the sentence. Not fully. Dante did. The room changed with it. He said my name without looking away from Matteo. "When I tell you to drop, you drop. Dante, little witness." 2 words, not cold now, not warm either. An anchor thrown hard. I went still. Matteo felt it. "That's almost tender." "It isn't," Dante said. Then he flicked the lighter. Flame jumped once. Mateo's attention snapped to the movement exactly long enough for me to obey. I dropped. The shot meant for my ribs went wide. Dante's hit Mateo high in the throat. Marco's team opened fire on the catwalk. Nino yelled something about union violations and dragged me by the back of my coat behind a crate while bullets hammered sparks off steel. "You smell like industrial solvent," he informed me, fumbling at my cuffs with a knife. "No offense, none taken." The cuffs snapped free. I grabbed his arm. "Adriano's at the rear river doors," Mateo said. 30-minute dock window. "There's a hook track overhead and—" He blinked. "You made a map." "I made a map." "Marry someone nice when this is over," he said. "The boss is a public health hazard." Then he shoved an extra magazine into my palm, realized what he had done, took it back immediately and said, "Actually, no. Terrible idea. Ignore me." I almost laughed, which felt insane. Across the room, Dante had reached Mateo. He did not make a speech. He did not ask why. He took Mateo's gun, broke 2 fingers with surgical precision, and moved on, because Adriano mattered more. Mateo crumpled alive enough to feel it. I would think about Dante's face then for a long time afterward. Not rage. Arithmetic. Adriano fired from the loading bay and caught Marco in the side. "Marco!" I shouted. He staggered into a column, blood darkening his jacket. Before anyone could regroup, Adriano hit the river doors and vanished into rain. Dante started after him. Then he looked back. At me. That single pause cost him the clean pursuit. I knew it. He knew it. And still he took it. He crossed the distance in 3 strides, caught the back of my neck with one hand, and touched his forehead to mine. Just for a second. Not a kiss. Worse. "You're breathing," he said, like accusation and prayer were the same language now. "So are you." His hand tightened once. Restraint. The 4th time, maybe 5th. He could have kissed me then. I think I would have let him. Instead, he stepped back because Marco was bleeding and Adriano was not yet dead, and that was the whole point of him. "Take her out," he ordered Nino. "I was already planning a dramatic withdrawal," Nino said. Lucia came in from the side entrance with medics and murder in her eyes. She dropped beside Marco at once. I caught Dante's sleeve before he turned away. "Giulio was your sister." He stilled. "Yes." Mateo said I was the first time again. A pulse moved in his throat. "Mateo says many things when dying." "That isn't an answer." "No, it wasn't." He looked at me then in a way I had only felt, never seen so directly, open and ruined and trying to close even as I watched. "The night my sister died," he said very quietly, "she passed me a note under a table because she knew not to speak. She was 16. His eyes didn't leave mine. "You wrote on a napkin and didn't beg." That was the moment. There it was. Why her? It hit me so hard my knees nearly gave. He brushed his thumb once over the pulse in my wrist, the same place he had measured it at table 9. "Stay with Lucia." Then he walked back into gun smoke and rain to finish what family had started. Marco lived through the night. Barely. Lucia stitched him in Dante's private sitting room because the clinic had become a tactical hallway and because, in her words, if men insist on dying, they can at least do it on washable upholstery. Nino held IV bags with the offended dignity of a duke demoted by fate. "I was not trained for this." "You were not trained for anything," Lucia said. "False. I am excellent at routes, engines, and yearning." Even Marco, pale with blood loss, made a noise that might have been a laugh. I sat on the floor against the far wall, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of cedar. Not because I was cold, because the world had become too sharp at the edges, and I needed weight from something that wasn't a gun. Dante came in at dawn. He looked like the night had tried very hard to keep him, rain still in his hair, shirt torn at the shoulder, blood on his knuckles and one sleeve burned dark. When the room saw him standing there, conversation thinned to silence all on its own. "It's done?" Lucia asked. He nodded once, but not enough. I got to my feet. Adriano? His gaze found mine. Alive, he said, for the moment. No one else reacted. They knew there was more. I did too. Dante looked at Marco. Warehouse on 23rd was a decoy. He's moving through the old chapel route under Pier Customs. The chapel. My chest tightened. Of course, the memorial bulletin, the old route. Julia attached to both wound and strategy so completely he still walked war through her grave. I'm coming, I said. Every head turned. No, Dante said. I know the dock map. I know Matteo's handwriting. I saw the route marks on the ledger vellum and on the envelope. If Adriano's using old customs tunnels, there's a blind transfer point under the river chapel stairs. The room went still for a different reason this time, because I was right. Dante understood it half a second before Marco did. I watched the knowledge hit both of them. Lucia muttered, Well, that's unfortunate. It's useful, I said. It's dangerous, Dante replied. It was always dangerous. The words came out harder than I intended. Tired people lose polish first. You don't get to keep telling me what this is as if I haven't been standing in it. He went very quiet. Then he stepped closer until the blanket brushed his boots. If you come, you do exactly what I say. The phrase landed between command and concession. I nodded. The convoy rolled before sunrise. 2 SUVs, no sirens, no wasted men. The city looked unreal at that hour, glass towers paling at the edges, while the river kept its own dark council under everything. We entered through a disused service chapel near the customs house, a narrow stone building with no parishioners and one locked iron door that smelled of damp dust when Marco forced it open. The stairs down were older than the city around them. I knew them before I saw the memorial niche at the landing. Julia's photograph had once hung here too, moved later upstairs to the estate chapel, maybe because Dante couldn't bear strangers passing her face. He stopped when he saw the empty nail. Only a fraction. Enough. That was all Adriano had wanted, I realized, to make every route to him pass through the first failure. We heard men below us. 2, maybe 3. Dante touched the small of my back once to move me behind the wall. The contact burned through coat and sweater both. Stay. I hate that word. I know. Almost. He went down first. The fight beneath the chapel was shorter than the ones before because by then, everyone involved was too strict down for theater. Marco's men handled the outer tunnel. Dante moved straight for the central chamber where river damp slicked the floor, and one old customs table sat beneath a hanging work lamp. Adriano waited there alone. No guns drawn. No panic. Mirror indeed. About time, he said. I stayed in the shadows at the stair mouth because Dante had told me to, and because sometimes obedience is not surrender. Sometimes it is aim. The 2 men faced each other across the table like the decade between them had only been a breath. We could have ruled cleanly, Adriano said. Ports, city contracts, no sentiment, no weakness. You mean no people, Dante said. Adriano smiled faintly. People are expensive. Ask Julia. The world narrowed. Dante crossed the space between them and hit him once, not wildly, with the full, awful force of a man who had rehearsed restraint for years and finally set it down. Adriano staggered, laughed blood into his teeth, and came back with a blade. The fight that followed was ugly in the way real violence is ugly. Slipping feet, breath, bodies hitting wood and stone, no noble speeches, no grace. Only 2 men who had once been boys under the same bad roof trying to decide which version of survival deserved the last word. Adriano got the knife along Dante's side. I moved before fear could argue. Matteo's spare pistol was still in my coat pocket from the warehouse. I drew it with both hands, sight shaking, and saw Adriano turn the blade toward Dante's throat while Dante's injured side slowed him by 1 fatal inch. Dante, I shouted. Both men glanced. That was enough. Dante drove Adriano backward into the customs table. The lamp crashed. The pistol in my hands shook harder. I could not fire. I knew I couldn't. Innocence survives some things by refusing a line even when it costs. Dante saw that too. He took the choice from me. The blade flashed once more, then Dante turned it, buried it under Adriano's ribs, and held it there until the other man's eyes changed from conviction to surprise. It should have felt like victory. It felt like losing an entire language. Adriano sagged against him, breath wet. Still chose. A witness, he managed. Dante's face gave nothing back. I chose not to become you. He let the body fall. For a second, no one moved. River water knocked softly beneath the floorboards. Morning pressed pale light into the tunnel mouth behind us. I stepped forward then because he was standing there bleeding and alone inside the thing he had just done. He looked at me as if from far away. I took the lighter from his hand without asking. I don't know when he had started clicking it again, only that the metal was warm from his palm. I closed it with my thumb and slipped it into my pocket so he would stop hearing that sound. Marco came in, took one look at Adriano, and exhaled the shape of an ending. It is over, he said. Dante did not answer. I did. It is over. War ended messily. That seemed only fair. The newspapers got a sanitized story about financial crimes, customs corruption, and the death of Adriano Viscari during an armed federal operation. No one would ever fully claim. Matteo Greco died 2 days later in custody without explaining himself to anyone, which would have irritated me if I had needed him for answers. I didn't anymore. Some men explained themselves best by the pattern of damage they left behind. Marco healed slowly and complained with grim professionalism. Lucia returned to running the estate as if she had not saved half the household personally. Nino decided his brush with heroism entitled him to a recovery pastry program and spent 3 straight weeks declaring war on his own waistband while leaving terrible love notes in the kitchen for Lucia to find and ignore. One of them read, "You strike me harder than destiny, yet still I return." She showed it to me while we were arranging flowers in the breakfast room and said, deadpan, "If I ever marry, someone sedate me first." I laughed so hard I had to set down the peonies. "You like him," I said. "I tolerate him theatrically. That's not a denial." Her mouth almost smiled. "You're learning this house too well." Maybe I was. That frightened me less than it should have. I moved into the garden studio in late autumn, the one overlooking the eastern wall where the morning light came in clean and silver. Dante had it cleared for me without asking what I needed, which was somehow more intimate than if he had. Paper. Lockable cabinets. A drafting table wide enough for city studies and portrait work. No one called it a concession. That mattered. The first time he came to see it, he stood in the doorway exactly the way he had stood in the library, in the clinic, in every place where his body learned before his words did. On the easel was a finished charcoal drawing of the chapel candle behind cracked glass. He looked at it for a long time. "That's how it felt," I said before I could stop myself. His gaze shifted to me. "Which part?" "All of it." He came farther into the room then, slow enough to let me move away if I wanted. I didn't. There had still been almost between us after the docks. Too many and not enough. His hand at the back of my chair while I sketched. My fingers brushing the torn seam of his shirt while Lucia changed the dressing on his side. One late night in the kitchen when he reached past me for a cup, and his breath touched my temple and I forgot what I had been saying halfway through the sentence. He always stopped first. Every time. Because I mattered more than the answer to wanting. That was when love became impossible to misname. The proposal happened 6 weeks after the funeral mass for men no priest named directly, no candles, no kneeling, no fairy tale softness pretending the world had changed species, just rain on the terrace stones, late afternoon light, and Dante finding me barefoot with dirt on my wrists because I had been repotting rosemary and refusing help out of stubbornness. He took the small spade from my hand. "You're bleeding." I looked down. A thorn had opened a shallow cut along my thumb. "It's barely anything." He held out his hand anyway. I gave him mine. He wrapped my thumb in a folded handkerchief, with the same concentration he once used on weapons and maps. That alone almost undid me. Lucia says you refuse to let staff carry things for you, he said. Lucia says many things, that you terrify the gardeners. They'll recover. His mouth shifted. The almost smile I lived for now. Then he reached into his coat and took out the silver lighter. My breath caught. For one alarming second, I thought he meant to give it to me, which felt too large and too dangerous to hold. Instead, he set it on the stone ledge between us, opened it once, closed it again, and said, "This was the last thing in my hand before I looked up and saw your napkin." I could not speak. I kept it moving because, if my hands were busy, I wouldn't touch you before you were ready, he went on quietly. The honesty of that made my heart trip over itself. He drew a ring box from the same pocket and set it beside the lighter. No flourish, no audience. I can give you houses, guards, my name already in practice if not in law, he said. None of that is why I'm asking. His eyes held mine. I am asking because when you had a door out, you chose with open eyes, and because I do not want a life that stops at the edges of what I survived. The rain softened around us. I looked at the ring, but not for long. The real thing was in his face, in the fact that this man, who explained nothing to his enemies and very little to himself, was standing in front of me making no attempt to sound easier than he was. "Dante," I said, and my voice failed for a second. I started again. "I don't know how to be good at this. Neither do I." That helped more than anything polished could have. "I can't promise I'll stop being afraid. I'm not asking that. I might hate parts of your world forever. You should." I let out a breath that felt like the end of a long illness. Then I said the truest thing I had. "If I say yes, it isn't because you saved me." His gaze changed, deepened, warmed into something dangerous in a new way. I know, little witness. There it was, the nickname finally landing like home instead of possession. "Yes," I whispered. His hand came up to my face the way it always did when he was 1 second from stopping himself. This time he didn't. The kiss was quiet. Rain cool and patient and earned down to the bone, no hunger rushing ahead of meaning. Just his mouth on mine and the whole long history of almost becoming real at last. When he drew back, he rested his forehead to mine exactly as he had in the warehouse. Same gesture. Different world. Inside the kitchen, something crashed. Nino's voice rose immediately. "I reject the implication that I dropped it from joy," Lucia answered. "You dropped it because you were eavesdropping while slicing pears. Both things can be true." I laughed against Dante's mouth. He closed his eyes for one brief, helpless second, as if my laughter still cost him something tender every time. Then he slid the ring onto my finger, with rain still drying on our hands. That evening, nothing exploded, which felt almost miraculous. 9 months later, I found him in the kitchen before sunrise. That sentence would have meant nothing to the girl I had been before Santoro's. To this version of me, it meant everything. The house was quiet in the particular way it only became quiet now. No longer braced for violence at every wall, just respectful of sleep. The marble floor still held the cool of night under my bare feet. Coffee breathed dark and bitter from the machine. Somewhere beyond the terrace doors, the gardens were silver with early rain. Dante stood at the counter in shirt sleeves, reading port reports, while a saucepan warmed milk for Lucia's ridiculous insistence that no one in the household should begin the day on coffee alone. The sight of him, their dangerous man, empire in his pocket, patiently watching milk felt more radical than any gunfight we had survived. He looked up when I came in. And there it was, that 1 second pause, the same one from table 9. From chapel stairs, from blood and rain and all the almost in between. The moment his attention hit me fully and the room altered around it. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "I was working, since 4. You say that like accusation." "I say it like observation." He reached for a mug. I reached too. Our hands brushed, lingered, did not leave when they should. One more, almost, softer now. Domestic and no less dangerous for that. On the table beside us lay a linen napkin and my open sketchbook. I had been designing invitations with Lucia for Nino, and after months of denial so dramatic it became community theater, Lucia's engagement dinner. He had proposed in the pantry after being hit in the head by a falling stockpot, and she had apparently found this persuasive. I smiled just thinking about it. "What?" Dante asked. "Nino told me yesterday that love is a medically significant event, and he deserves soup for life." "That seems low as demands go." "It escalates. He also wants custom cufflinks with almonds." Dante's mouth changed. Not quite a smile exactly. "Better. The version that belonged to mornings." I moved to the table and sat. He came around a moment later, lighter in hand, clicking it once without flame before setting it beside my sketchbook. The sound stopped me. Dry metal. Precise. Same motif, same man, different weight now. Not a warning. Not restraint sharp enough to cut. A habit I had learned like another language. I covered the lighter with my palm. He looked at my hand, then at me. "You still do that," he said quietly. "Do what?" "When you're frightened, you make the line straight first." I frowned. He tapped the napkin. Only then did I see what I had written absent-mindedly while thinking through guest counts and flower deliveries. "They'll be late if Nina chooses his own tie." Same scratch of hurried block letters across linen. Same instinct to put order on cloth before voice. I had done it without noticing. A laugh broke out of me. Then, unexpectedly, tears stung right after it. Dante's face changed at once. He crouched beside my chair, one hand on my knee, the other taking the napkin. "It's all right. I know." I pressed my fingers to my eyes and let out a shaky breath. That's the problem. It's all right, and I still remember. His thumb moved once against my knee. So do I. There it was. The unresolved thread no safety could erase. Love did not remove what we had survived. It taught us where to set it down on gentler days. I took the napkin back and turned it over. On the blank side, I drew quickly 2 coffee cups. One lighter, a bent rosemary stem and a jar. And the narrow space between 2 people at a kitchen table that was no longer empty. The lines came easy. True. He watched the drawing appear. "You are leaving out the reports," he said. "They ruin the composition. The empire will recover." I finished the shadow beneath the lighter and looked up. He was already watching me in that unwalled way he rarely allowed himself. The full-circle truth arrived then with no drama at all. He hadn't fallen for me because I was beautiful or fragile or different in some decorative way. He had fallen because when death came to the table, I steadied my hand and made the line straight. And after everything, I still did. It still landed the same. Maybe harder. I set the pencil down. He reached for the lighter again. Instead of clicking it, he placed it in my palm and folded my fingers closed around the silver body. Chapter 1 had opened with that sound between us. This time there was no blood in the room, no waiter returning, no door locking from the outside. Only morning, coffee, and the man who had once used this lighter to cover my plea for help, now giving it to me as if trust could become ordinary through repetition. "For you?" I asked. "For us?" he said. That nearly broke me in the best possible way. I leaned down and kissed him before I could overthink it, soft and brief, and still a little shy in the center. His hand came to the back of my neck with devastating care. When I drew back, he rested his forehead to mine. "Little witness," he murmured. Warm now. Entirely warm. Outside, the first car rolled up the drive with flowers for the engagement dinner. Somewhere upstairs, Nino shouted that formal shoes were an instrument of state violence. Lucia told him to stop practicing vows at the staff. I laughed into the morning. Dante closed his eyes at the sound like a man taking a wound he would choose every time. The ordinary life we had built did not erase the darkness. The gates were still locked at night. Men still checked routes before any public dinner. Some doors in this house would always be heavier than others, but I had chosen it with open eyes. And he had met that choice with both hands. Would I have chosen him if I had known the exact cost sooner? I still asked myself that on quiet mornings. I think love is not proved by saying yes once. I think it is proved by learning what yes contains and staying truthful inside it. If you had been me, would you have chosen Dante and let your old life die for it? He took the napkin from under my hand, folded it once, and tucked it into his pocket like something worth keeping. Then he poured the coffee,